Marcus Reed stood at the entrance of the VIP lounge on Station Omega, holding his ticket in one hand and his military bag in the other. The station buzzed with activity as hundreds of different alien species moved through the corridors, their voices creating a constant hum of conversation in dozens of languages. The VIP lounge was quieter, filled with comfortable seats and soft lighting that made the wealthy passengers feel at ease. The attendant behind the desk was an Alteran, her skin shimmering like crystal in the artificial light. She looked at Marcus, with barely hidden disgust, her large eyes narrowing as she took in his appearance. His uniform was clean but worn, showing the signs of long service. The fabric was tough military issue, designed for harsh conditions rather than comfort or appearance. "I need to see your boarding pass again," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality that all Alterans possessed. Marcus handed over the small electronic device without complaint. The attendant scanned it twice, frowning at the results each time. "This shows you have a VIP ticket," she said slowly, as if the words tasted bad in her mouth. "But there must be some mistake. This section is reserved for civilized species only." Behind her, several passengers looked up from their conversations. A group of Velthani nobles sat near the large windows, their tall frames draped in expensive robes that changed color with their movements. Their skin was pale and smooth like polished marble, and they moved with the grace that came from centuries of refined breeding. One of them, wearing robes embedded with precious stones, stood up and approached the desk. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "This human has a VIP ticket," the attendant explained. "But surely there has been an error. The regulations clearly state that aggressive species should not be allowed in the civilized sections." The Velthani noble looked Marcus up and down, taking in every detail of his appearance. "A human," he said, pronouncing the word like it left. A bad taste in his mouth. "From Earth, no doubt. That death world that spawns nothing but violence and destruction." Marcus remained silent, his face showing no emotion. He had heard these words before, in a dozen different languages on 100 different worlds. The galaxy had decided what humans were, and nothing he said would change their minds. "The human should be grateful we allow his kind on civilian transports at all," the Velthani continued, his voice growing louder so that other passengers could hear. "After what they did on Kepler 442b, I am surprised they are permitted to travel freely." Other passengers began to gather, drawn by the commotion. A group of Corvan traders, their forearms busy with various devices, looked up from their work. Several Thraxian merchants stopped their quiet conversations to watch the scene unfold. Even the Nictan diplomats, usually too dignified to involve themselves in such matters, turned their attention to the human standing at the desk. "The records are quite clear," another Velthani said, joining the conversation. "Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world. Its inhabitants are barely evolved beyond primitive barbarism. They know nothing of art, philosophy, or true civilization. They understand only violence and destruction." The Alteran attendant nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly my point. How can we expect our distinguished passengers to travel in comfort when forced to share space with such an aggressive species? The very presence of a human would disturb the peaceful atmosphere we work so hard to maintain." Marcus could feel the weight of dozens of eyes upon him. The whispers had started, spreading through the lounge like ripples on a pond. He heard fragments of conversation in various languages, but the meaning was always the same. Fear, disgust, and contempt mixed together in a cocktail of galactic prejudice. "I have heard stories," whispered a Corvan trader to his companion. "They say humans can survive in environments that would kill other species within minutes. Their world is so hostile that they have developed an immunity to almost every known toxin." "That is what makes them so dangerous," replied his friend. "They do not understand the concept of restraint. On their world, everything is trying to kill everything else. They have never learned to live in peace." The Velthani noble gestured grandly toward the general seating area, where hard benches and basic amenities awaited the lower-class passengers. Perhaps it would be best if the human waited with the other workers and common travelers. I am sure he will find the accommodations more suited to his station." The Altern attendant smiled, clearly relieved to have found a solution. "Of course, that makes perfect sense. The general seating area is much more appropriate." She turned to Marcus with false politeness. "Sir, I am afraid there has been a misunderstanding. Your ticket will be honored, but you will need to wait in the general seating area. The transport to Centauri Prime departs in 6 hours." Marcus looked around the lounge one more time, taking in the faces of the passengers who had judged him. Without knowing anything about him beyond his species, he saw fear in some eyes, disgust in others, and simple curiosity in a few, but nowhere did he see understanding or acceptance. "I understand," he said quietly, his voice carrying no trace of anger or resentment. He picked up his bag and turned toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet lounge as he walked away. The conversations resumed behind him, but in hushed tones. The passengers had been reminded of the dangerous galaxy they lived in, where primitive species like humans were allowed to travel among their betters. They felt superior and safe in their civilized bubble, protected by laws and regulations that kept the savage races in their proper place. Marcus found a bench in the general seating area and sat down, placing his bag beside him. Around him, workers and maintenance crews went about their business, paying little attention to the human in their midst. These beings knew what it meant to work for a living, and they had no time for the prejudices that occupied the wealthy passengers in the VIP lounge. The bag beside him was standard military issue, unmarked except for a small insignia that none of the aliens would recognize. Inside were personal items, a few books, and some equipment that looked unremarkable to anyone who might glance at it. Nothing that would suggest the true nature of the man who carried it. As the hours passed, Marcus sat in silence, watching the endless stream of beings moving through the station. He thought about the comfortable seats in the VIP lounge, the soft lighting, and the peaceful atmosphere that the passengers valued so highly. He thought about the words they had spoken, the fears they had expressed, and the assumptions they had made. They had no idea how right they were about some things, and how completely wrong they were about others. They would never know the truth, and perhaps that was for the best. The galaxy slept peacefully because some truths were too dangerous to reveal. The general seating area was a different world from the VIP lounge. Here, the lighting was harsher and the seats were basic metal benches with thin cushions. The air recycling system worked harder to handle the larger crowds, creating a constant background hum that mixed with the sounds of conversation and machinery. Marcus found himself surrounded by working-class beings from across the galaxy. Kovem mechanics with their forearms worked on small devices while they waited. Thraxian cargo handlers shared meals from simple containers. A group of Nicton technicians discussed repairs needed on their home station. These aliens showed no fear of the human among them, only the mild curiosity that came from seeing something unusual. A Corvan mechanic with oil stains on his work clothes looked up from the device he was repairing. His compound eyes studied Marcus with interest rather than fear. "Never seen a human before," he said in accented standard. "Work on ships mostly, so I meet lots of different species, but never one of your kind. We tend to keep to ourselves." Marcus replied, settling more comfortably on the bench. His military bag sat beside him, unremarkable among the tool bags and personal belongings of the other passengers. The Corvan nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. They say your people are from one of those Deathworlds. Must be tough, growing up in a place like that." There was no judgment in his voice, only the understanding of someone who had worked hard for everything he had. "It has its challenges," Marcus said simply. He had learned long ago that the less he said about Earth, the better. Most aliens had formed their opinions based on official reports and popular stories, and those opinions were exactly what the galaxy's leaders wanted them to believe. As the hours passed, other passengers began to include Marcus in their conversations. A Thraxian trader named Keth shared stories about the different worlds he had visited. A young Nicton engineer named Lila talked about her work maintaining the station's power systems. These beings treated him as just another traveler, not as a representative of a dangerous species. My grandfather used to tell stories about humans, Layla said during a lull in the conversation. He was a merchant pilot back when the borders were more open. Said he once saw human soldiers save a colony ship from raiders. But I always thought he was just telling tales to make his stories more exciting. Marcus looked at her with interest. What kind of stories? Oh, you know how old people are, she said with a laugh. He claimed the humans fought off an entire raider fleet with just 3 ships. Said they moved their vessels in ways that should have been impossible, like they understood space combat better than anyone else in the galaxy. But that was probably just his imagination. The Corvan mechanic looked up from his work. I heard similar stories from some of the older engineers. They talk about human involvement in the border wars, but when I looked it up in the official records, I could not find any mention of humans fighting in those conflicts. The border wars were classified, said Keth the Threxian. Most of the records were sealed after the peace treaties were signed, but I have heard whispers in the cargo holds and maintenance bays. Workers talk, and sometimes they know things that do not appear in official reports. Meanwhile, in the VIP lounge, the conversation had taken a different turn. Lord Tethys, the Velthani noble who had spoken against Marcus earlier, was holding court with a group of wealthy passengers. His voice carried the authority of someone, used to being the center of attention. The human problem is more serious than most people realize, he was saying to his audience. Earth is not just a death world. It is a world that has produced nothing but violence and aggression. Their entire history is one of constant warfare, species against species, nation against nation. A wealthy Alteran merchant nodded in agreement. I have read the cultural reports. They have no true art, no philosophy worth studying. Their literature is filled with stories of conquest and destruction. Even their entertainment focuses on conflict and violence. Exactly, Lord Tethys continued. This is why the Galactic Council was wise to restrict their expansion. Can you imagine what would happen if we allowed unlimited human settlement? Their aggressive nature would spread like a disease, contaminating the peaceful civilizations we have worked so hard to build. An elderly Corvan diplomat, one of the few non-humanoid species wealthy enough to afford VIP seating, shifted uncomfortably in his specially designed chair. But surely they must have some redeeming qualities. The council would not have granted them membership if they were completely without merit. Limited membership, Lord Tethys corrected. They are restricted to non-combat roles and carefully monitored colonies. The Treaty of Epsilon makes it very clear that humans are not to be involved in any military activities beyond basic security on their own worlds. The Alteran merchant leaned forward conspiratorially. I have heard rumors that some humans work as mercenaries in the outer systems. Supposedly they are quite effective in that role, though I cannot imagine why anyone would hire such primitive beings. Desperation, Lord Tethys said dismissively. When civilized species face truly dangerous situations, they sometimes make poor choices. But such arrangements are illegal under galactic law and heavily punished when discovered. Back in the general seating area, the conversations had become more relaxed as the passengers got to know each other. Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying the company of these working beings. They had no political agenda, no social position to protect. They simply wanted to get to their destinations and continue their lives. You know, said Lila the Nicton engineer, I always wondered why humans were considered so dangerous. You seem pretty normal to me. Maybe a bit quieter than most species, but not threatening, Marcus smiled slightly. Appearances can be deceiving. People tend to fear what they do not understand. That is true, agreed Keth the Thraxion. I have been to many worlds, and I have seen how different species react to unfamiliar things. Fear is often the first response, especially when the unknown comes from a place with a dangerous reputation. The Corvan mechanic looked up from his work again, but reputation is not always reality. I have worked with beings from all kinds of worlds, including some that were supposed to be hostile or primitive. Most of the time, they were just people trying to make a living, same as anyone else. The galaxy is full of stories, Marcus said quietly. Some of them are true, some are not, and some are more complicated than they appear. The important thing is not to judge based on stories alone. As the hours passed, the transport's departure time approached. In the VIP lounge, the passengers, prepared for what they expected to be a comfortable journey to Centauri Prime, they had no idea that their peaceful existence was about to be shattered by news that would change everything they thought they knew about the galaxy. In the general seating area, Marcus sat quietly among his new companions, his bag beside him containing items that would soon become very important. He listened to their stories, shared what little he could about his own experiences, and waited for the moment when everything would change. The transport was scheduled to depart in 2 hours, but Marcus had a feeling they would not be leaving on schedule. He had learned to trust his instincts over the years, and those instincts were telling him that something was about to happen that would reveal truths that the galaxy had worked hard to keep hidden. The first sign that something was wrong came through the station's communication system. Instead of the usual boarding announcements and commercial messages, emergency tones began to sound throughout Station Omega. The conversations in both the VIP lounge and the general seating area stopped as beings looked up at the speakers with concern. "Attention all passengers and station personnel," came the voice of the station commander, his words carrying the weight of serious news. "We have received reports of coordinated attacks on multiple core worlds. All departures are temporarily suspended pending further information." In the VIP lounge, the wealthy passengers began to murmur among themselves. This was not the kind of news they were used to hearing. Their comfortable lives had been built on the assumption that the galaxy's core worlds were safe from any serious threats. Lord Tethys stood up from his seat, his expensive robes rustling as he moved. "This must be some kind of mistake," he said to the other passengers. "The core worlds have the strongest defenses in the galaxy. Nothing could threaten them simultaneously." But even as he spoke, more emergency broadcasts began to fill the air. Reports of massive fleet movements, orbital stations going dark, and entire defense networks being overwhelmed. The names of the attacked worlds sent shock waves through the assembled beings: Altera Prime, Velthan, and Corva Central. 3 of the most important and heavily defended worlds in the galaxy. In the general seating area, the working-class passengers reacted differently. They had no illusions about the galaxy's safety. They knew that peace was fragile and that dangerous forces moved in the darkness between the stars. "This sounds bad," said Keth the Thraxian trader, his voice heavy with concern. "If someone can attack 3 core worlds at once, they must have resources we have not seen before." The Corva mechanic put down his tools and listened intently to the emergency broadcasts. "My homeworld is Corva Central," he said quietly. "My family lives there." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came before combat. He had experienced this feeling many times over the years, but never in a civilian setting. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small communication device that looked like a standard civilian unit but contained technology that most species had never seen. "I need to make a call," he said to his companions. Standing up and moving to a quieter corner of the seating area, the device activated with a soft chime, and Marcus spoke quietly into it. "Command, this is Reed. I need a situation report." The response came immediately, transmitted through encrypted channels that bypassed the station's normal communication systems. "Reed, we have been trying to reach you. The Zephyrians have launched simultaneous attacks on 3 core worlds using some kind of new weapon technology. Fleet Admiral Karos is on his way to your location." Marcus felt his blood run cold. The Zephyrians were one of the galaxy's most aggressive military powers, but they had always been contained by the combined fleets of the core worlds. If they had developed new weapons capable of overwhelming those defenses, the situation was worse than anyone realized. "How long until Karos arrives?" he asked. "Less than an hour. He is bringing full authorization codes." Marcus understood what that meant. Authorization codes were only issued when the galaxy faced its most serious threats. The kind of threats that required responses that most species would never know about. He returned to his seat, his mind already shifting from civilian mode to military thinking. Around him, the other passengers were dealing with the news in their own ways. Some were trying to contact family members on the affected worlds. Others were discussing what the attacks might mean for the galaxy's stability. "Are you all right?" asked Lila the Nicton engineer, noticing the change in Marcus's expression. "You look like you have seen a ghost?" "Just concerned about the news," Marcus replied. "Attacks like this do not happen without serious planning and resources." Meanwhile, in the VIP lounge, panic was beginning to set in among the wealthy passengers. These beings had never faced real danger before, and they were not equipped to handle the reality of galactic warfare. "We need to get off this station immediately," declared a wealthy Alteran merchant. "If the attackers are targeting core worlds, they might hit transportation hubs next." "But where can we go?" asked another passenger. "If 3 core worlds can be attacked simultaneously, nowhere is safe." Lord Tethys tried to maintain his composure, but his voice betrayed his fear. "The Council will respond," he said. "They have emergency protocols for situations like this. The combined fleets of the member worlds will drive back these attackers." But even as he spoke, new reports were coming in that contradicted his confident words. The combined fleets were being destroyed faster than anyone had thought possible. Ships that had been considered invincible were being reduced to debris by weapons that cut through their defenses like they were made of paper. It was then that Fleet Admiral Koros arrived at the station. The admiral was a Thraxian, his scaled skin marked with the scars of many battles. He moved with the confidence of someone who had faced danger many times and survived. Behind him came a small group of military officers from various species, all wearing the insignia of the Galactic Defense Force. The admiral's arrival caused a stir throughout the station. Passengers and workers alike recognized the uniform and rank insignia. This was one of the highest-ranking military officers in the galaxy, and his presence meant that the situation was even more serious than the emergency broadcasts had indicated. Koros moved through the station with purpose, his officers following close behind. He passed through the VIP lounge without stopping, though many of the wealthy passengers tried to get his attention. He was looking for someone specific, and he found him in the general seating area. "Colonel Reed," the admiral said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet space, "we need you." The word colonel hit the assembled beings like a physical blow. Marcus was not just a human traveler who had been refused a seat in the VIP lounge. He was a military officer with a rank that commanded respect throughout the galaxy. Marcus stood up, his entire demeanor changing as he shifted from civilian to military mode. "How bad is it, Admiral?" 3 worlds, simultaneous strikes. The Zephyrians have developed some kind of new plasma weapon technology that can penetrate our best shields. Our fleets are being destroyed faster than we can deploy them. Chorus's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the seating area. "The Council has arised Protocol 7. The mention of Protocol 7 sent shock waves through the crowd. Most beings had never heard of it, but those who had understood that it represented the galaxy's most closely guarded secret. It was a protocol that was only activated when the survival of galactic civilization itself was at stake. From the VIP lounge, Lord Tethys and the other wealthy passengers watched in stunned silence as the human they had dismissed as a primitive savage received orders from one of the most powerful military officers in the galaxy. Their comfortable assumptions about the nature of the universe were beginning to crumble. "I will need to see the tactical reports," Marcus said, his voice carrying an authority that made even the admiral's officers straighten to attention. "And I will need access to secure communications." "Of course, Colonel," Koros replied. "Everything you need is being prepared." As the 2 military officers moved toward the station's command center, the passengers in both sections of the waiting area were left to contemplate what they had just witnessed. The human who had been refused a seat among the civilized species was apparently one of the most important military figures in the galaxy. The command center of Station Omega was a place few civilians ever saw. Banks of monitors displayed information from across the galaxy, while military personnel worked at stations that controlled communication networks and defense systems. Admiral Koros led Marcus through the security checkpoints, past guards who snapped to attention as they recognized the human officer. "Show me everything," Marcus said as they approached the main tactical display. The holographic projection showed the 3 attacked worlds in devastating detail, orbital stations reduced to debris, planetary defense grids offline, and the scattered remains of what had once been powerful fleet formations. "The Zephyrians hit us with something we have never seen before," Koros explained, manipulating the display to show the weapon signatures. "Their new plasma technology can cut through our shields like they do not exist. Standard defensive tactics are useless against it." Marcus studied the tactical data with the eye of someone who had seen too much warfare. His expression was grim as he analyzed the attack patterns and weapon effectiveness. "Classic Zephyrian doctrine," he said after a long moment. "They are using the new technology to mask their fundamental weaknesses." "Weaknesses?" asked one of the Admiral's officers, a young Kovan who had been taking notes. "Sir, they have just destroyed 3 of our strongest defensive positions." "They have overextended their supply lines," Marcus replied, pointing to specific locations on the display. "This is the same mistake they made during the Frontier campaign. They focus so much on the initial strike that they forget about logistics and reinforcement." The mention of the Frontier campaign caused confused looks among the military officers. Several of them exchanged glances, clearly recognizing the name but unable to place it in any official records. "The Frontier campaign?" asked the Corvan officer. "I do not recall that engagement in any of the military histories." "You would not," Marcus said simply. "Most of our operations are classified at levels that do not appear in standard military records." Admiral Koros activated a secure communication channel, and Marcus began issuing orders in a voice that carried absolute authority. "Strike Team Alpha, this is Reed. Operation Lazarus is now active. Deploy to Grid 779 and begin harassment protocols." The response came immediately from across the galaxy. "Understood, Colonel. Good to have you back in the field. Strike Team Beta, prepare for deep penetration mission. Target their supply depots using Pattern 7 tactics." "Roger that, Colonel. Teams are already in position." As Marcus continued coordinating the response, more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place for the listening officers. The humans were not just involved in the galactic military. They were running operations that most species had never heard of, using tactics and strategies that seemed to come from decades of experience back. In the waiting areas, word of what was happening in the command center had spread among the passengers. The VIP lounge was in chaos as wealthy beings struggled to understand how their comfortable worldview had been so completely wrong. Lord Tethys paced back and forth, his expensive robes trailing behind him as he tried to make sense of what he had witnessed. "This cannot be possible," he said to anyone who would listen. "Humans are restricted to non-combat roles. The Treaty of Epsilon clearly states that they are not permitted to participate in military operations." The Altern attendant who had refused Marcus a seat now sat in stunned silence, her crystalline features reflecting the emergency lighting that had replaced the soft ambiance of the lounge. "But he was just a passenger," she whispered. "He had a ticket like anyone else." "He was a colonel," said an elderly Corvan diplomat, the words carrying the weight of revelation. "A ranking officer in what appears to be a military force that we know nothing about." In the general seating area, the working-class passengers were having their own discussions about what they had witnessed, but their reactions were different from those in the VIP lounge. These beings had always known that the galaxy held secrets, and they were more accepting of the idea that not everything was as it seemed. "My grandfather's stories might have been true after all," said Lila, the Nicton engineer, her voice filled with wonder. "He said humans were involved in military operations, but we all thought he was just telling tales." "There are always rumors in the cargo holds," agreed Keth the Thraxian trader. Workers hear things that do not make it into official reports, but nobody ever believed the stories about human soldiers. The Corvan mechanic whose home world had been attacked looked up from his communication device. I just received word from my family. They are safe, but they said something strange. They reported seeing human ships engaging the Zephyrian fleet. Human ships that moved like nothing they had ever seen before. As the hours passed, more reports began filtering in from the attacked worlds. The initial panic was giving way to cautious optimism as the Zephyrian forces found themselves under attack from unexpected directions. Ships that had seemed invincible against conventional tactics were being outmaneuvered by opponents who understood their weaknesses. In the command center, Marcus continued to coordinate the response with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. His orders were being carried out across the galaxy by forces that most species had never known existed. Strike Team Gamma, what is your status on the Altera front? We have successfully disrupted their supply lines, Colonel. Enemy forces are beginning to pull back to defend their logistics bases. Excellent. Maintain pressure, but do not overcome it. Remember, we want them to retreat, not turn this into a prolonged engagement. Admiral Koros watched the human officer with growing amazement. It was clear that Marcus was not just a military advisor or specialist. He was commanding a coordinated response involving dozens of units across multiple star systems. Colonel, the Admiral said during a brief lull in the communications, how many human units are currently deployed in the galaxy? Marcus paused in his work and looked at the Admiral with an expression that might have been amusement. Enough, he said simply. We have been preparing for situations like this for longer than most species realize. But the Treaty of Epsilon, protested one of the younger officers. It clearly restricts human military activities. The Treaty of Epsilon is a public document, Marcus replied. It was designed to reassure the civilian populations of member worlds that they had nothing to fear from human expansion. But there are other treaties signed in secret that tell a different story, the Admiral nodded slowly. The Council has always known that public opinion required certain restrictions on human activities. But when the galaxy faces extinction-level threats, practical concerns override political considerations. Marcus returned to his communications, issuing orders that would coordinate the final phase of the response. The Zephyrian forces were being systematically dismantled by tactics they had never encountered before. Their new weapons, so effective against conventional defenses, were useless against opponents who refused to fight conventionally. All units, this is Reed, begin Phase 3 operations. Push them back to their own territory and make it clear that further aggression will not be tolerated. As the reports of victory began to pour in from across the galaxy, the passengers in the waiting areas could only listen in stunned silence. The human who had been refused a seat among the civilized species had just coordinated the defense of galactic civilization itself. The truth was finally beginning to emerge, and it was more complex and disturbing than anyone had imagined. The galaxy's peace had been maintained not by the civilized species who claimed credit for it, but by the supposedly primitive humans who worked in the shadows to protect a universe that had never acknowledged their sacrifice. The final reports came in as the station's emergency lighting returned to normal. The Zephyrian fleet was in full retreat, their new weapons proving useless against tactics they had never encountered. The 3 core worlds were secure, their populations safe, and the galaxy's peace had been restored once again. Marcus stood at the command center's main display, watching the last of the enemy forces disappear into the darkness between the stars. His expression was tired but satisfied. Another crisis had been averted, another threat had been neutralized, and the galaxy would continue its peaceful existence without ever knowing how close it had come to destruction. Strike Team Omega, this is Reed. Report your status. All objectives complete, Colonel. The Zephyrian command ship has been neutralized, and their remaining forces are retreating to their home territory. Another victory for the galaxy's invisible guardians. Admiral Koros approached Marcus with a mixture of respect and exhaustion. The Council will want a full report, Colonel. This operation will need to be classified at the highest levels. As always, Marcus replied. The galaxy sleeps better when it does not know what lurks in the darkness. As they prepared to leave the command center, Admiral Koros addressed the assembled officers. What you have witnessed today is classified at levels that most beings in the galaxy do not even know exist. The peace that our civilization enjoys depends on maintaining certain illusions about the nature of galactic security. The officers nodded, understanding the implications. They had seen the truth behind the comfortable lies that kept the galaxy stable. They had witnessed the existence of forces that operated in the shadows, protecting species that would never know their names. In the VIP lounge, the wealthy passengers were struggling to process what they had learned. The human they had dismissed as a primitive savage had just saved their civilization, and the implications of that fact were staggering. Lord Tethys sat in his expensive seat, his robes wrinkled from hours of nervous pacing. "How is this possible?" he asked the other passengers. "Everything we have been taught about humans, everything we believe about galactic history has been a lie." "Not a lie," said the elderly Corvan diplomat. "A necessary fiction? Think about it. If the galaxy knew that its survival depended on a species we have been taught to fear and despise, what would happen to the social order?" The Alteran attendant, who had refused Marcus a seat, was staring at the entrance where he had stood hours earlier. "I told him he was not civilized enough to sit with us," she whispered. "I told him his kind was too aggressive for our peaceful atmosphere." "His kind has been maintaining our peaceful atmosphere," the diplomat replied. "They have been standing guard while we sleep, fighting wars we never knew existed, protecting us from threats we cannot imagine." In the general seating area, the working-class passengers were having a different conversation. They had always known that the galaxy held secrets, and they were more accepting of the truth that had been revealed. "So the stories were true after all," said Lila the Nicton engineer. "My grandfather really did see human soldiers saving that colony ship. They have been out there all along, protecting us." "But why keep it secret?" asked Kef the Thraxian trader. "If humans are our protectors, why not tell the galaxy the truth?" The Corvan mechanic, who had been listening to reports from his homeworld, looked up from his communication device. "Because people like us would accept it," he said. "But people like them," he gestured toward the VIP lounge, "would panic. They need to feel superior to something. If they knew the truth, their whole worldview would collapse." As the transport finally prepared for departure, Marcus returned to the waiting areas to collect his bag. The passengers watched him with new eyes, seeing not a primitive savage but a guardian who had risked everything to protect them. Lord Tethys approached him, his earlier arrogance replaced by shame and confusion. "Colonel, I must apologize for my earlier words. We had no idea who you were or what you represent." "You said exactly what your government wanted you to say," Marcus replied without malice. "Fear keeps populations in line. It is easier to maintain social order when people believe they are superior to something. But surely the truth would be better than living a lie." Marcus looked at the Velfani noble with eyes that had seen too much warfare. "The truth is that your peaceful civilization exists because my people are willing to do what yours cannot. The truth is that every night, human soldiers stand watch in the darkness while you sleep safely in your beds. The truth is that we fight wars you never hear about against enemies you cannot imagine." He picked up his bag and prepared to leave. "But the truth is also that this arrangement works. You get to live in peace and we get to do what we do best. Everyone wins as long as the secret is kept." As Marcus walked toward the transport that would take him back to his duties, the passengers were left to contemplate the implications of what they had learned. The galaxy they thought they knew was an illusion, carefully maintained by forces that operated beyond their understanding. Admiral Karos addressed the assembled beings one final time. "The events of today are classified at the highest levels. The stability of galactic civilization depends on maintaining the current balance of knowledge and ignorance. You have seen the truth, but that truth must not spread beyond this station." The VIP lounge remained quiet as the wealthy passengers contemplated their comfortable lives. The general seating area buzzed with quiet conversation as working beings discussed the revelation with the practical acceptance of those who had always known the galaxy held secrets. Marcus boarded the military transport that would take him back to the shadows, back to the hidden bases and secret operations that kept the galaxy safe. As the transport departed, he looked back at Station Omega one last time, thinking about the passengers who had learned the truth and would have to live with it. The galaxy would continue its peaceful existence. Its civilized species would maintain their comfortable superiority, and the dangerous humans would remain safely contained in the public consciousness. But somewhere in the darkness, the Deathworld soldiers would continue their eternal watch, protecting a universe that would never know their names. The transport disappeared into the void, carrying its silent guardian back to the wars that history would never record. Behind it, Station Omega returned to its normal operations, its passengers continuing their journeys with the knowledge that their comfortable world was more fragile than they had ever imagined. In the depths of space, other human ships moved through the darkness, carrying soldiers who had volunteered to be forgotten, to be feared, to be despised as long as the galaxy remained safe. They were the invisible guardians, the silent protectors, the Deathworld soldiers who had been refused a seat among the civilized species but had earned the right to stand guard over them all. The galaxy slept peacefully, never knowing that its greatest strength was also its greatest secret. And in that silence, the truth remained hidden, protected by those who understood that some sacrifices were too important to acknowledge and too necessary to abandon.